The other day, I was reading a post by today's guest where he detailed the 5 lessons that he learned from his father without his father ever saying anything. You may remember Pete Durand from a previous episode on The Evolved Man, but Pete is the chief executive officer of Crucible Partners. He's a fitness guru, even though he's not in the business of fitness, but he's also the host of the Eating Pro podcast. Pete and I connected some time ago and have found that we have shared passion in health and fitness, business, and being a father. And so I asked him to come back on and talk about what does it mean to be a father in today's day and age? We cover topics around resilience, how fathers can show up for their children at different stages of life, and why learning from mistakes might be the most important thing that you do as a father. The episode is 176. The guest is Pete Durand. Welcome to The Evolved Man, where we are at war with the mediocrity of modern man. The Evolved Man is for men like you who are willing to be strong, open, and aggressive learners. Men who are not afraid to disrupt and change. It's time we ditch the current conventional idea that we devolve with age, that the dad bod is our destiny, and that the glory days are behind us. Your best isn't behind you, and I'm here to provide you with practical tools, a few tips and tricks, and everyday wisdom to help you evolve into your highest form. Strong, lean, smart, educated, and emotionally intelligent. Now, let's go to war. Well, Pete Durand, welcome back. Thanks for coming.
It's good to be on the program again. And when you reached out, particularly about the topic you want to jump into, how could I say no?
I think it's a topic that both of us feel very passionate about. But, you know, as I mentioned before the recording started, it's important, I believe, in today's day and age that people hear from somebody who is a very busy professional, somebody who's, running his own business, who puts a priority on staying healthy, but doesn't neglect the areas of life that I think are most important. And that's namely being a father and, parenting. In our day and age where being overweight and obese is north of 70%. And so you're in the minority if you are a healthy, fit individual. And we continue to see issues where parents, men in particular, are just not present in their kids' lives. I think this is a message that's more relevant today than anything else. So I appreciate you coming on to
Yeah.
talk about it. I know setting an example is important for you, but I also believe it's not only critical that we set an example for our kids to follow, but we also teach them the what and the why as well. So,
Yeah.
aside from setting an example of a well-lived life, I'm curious, how do you teach your kids?
Well, you know, actually, one of the things I've been watching with your content is something I've tried to get better at, which is,
Mm,
and the word you mentioned is why,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I think when your kids are really young, why is not important, right? They just need to see it. They may not understand the why, but the example resonates far more than any words you can say.
hmm,
So I think as the example twists into the point when your kids start to have to make their own decisions, that's when the why becomes important.
yeah, yeah.
So, my kids are older and out of the house. So, I've got a grandson and a granddaughter on the way. We just found that out, so that's exciting
Hey,
news.
congratulations.
Yep. And my oldest son, he's almost 28. He's been out on his own. He lives it, so he's hardcore fit. All my kids take care of themselves, but for different reasons, and I think for different purposes, right? So my two boys, we talked about fatherhood. I'll share with you the conversation I had with my youngest son literally just recently. So he just graduated. He's off to New York City. He's going to go to the big city and take a big job, and he's ready to conquer the world,
Nice.
which scares his mom to death.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Right?
Any mom would be.
Yeah, and he he's a talented kid, right? So I think Sammy's worked really hard. He played a D1 sport and did all the right things, but his intensity towards exercise is different than my older son.
Mm.
He did it because it was part of what he had to do to play soccer in college. So now I'm trying to figure out how to transition that post-athlete life to just doing it because it's the right thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you're spot on. So I talked to him about the why. And by the way, if I was to sit down with any one of my kids and have a discussion with them about what's important in life, the list would be pretty long. It wouldn't be just
It's
three
not
or
just,
four things.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah. It's not
there'd
just
be
health and fitness. There's a lot of
yeah,
things. Yeah.
there'd be 10 things on it. But I did say I'm going to give you four things that if you do these four, the other six on the list will naturally happen. So the first thing I told him, I said, and he's got a very serious girlfriend who we think the world of. She's great, great family. I said, when you wake up in the morning, from this day forward, your responsibilities are different than they were as a college kid. Whether you become a husband and then eventually become a father, and I said, I hope I've demonstrated this to you. And this is all to the theme of it's all evolved for me as well.
Yeah.
I love the
Love that.
concept of the evolved man, right? Because we're constantly evolving.
Yeah.
But here are the four things I told him. Number one, first thing you do when you wake up in the morning is you pray.
Mm.
If you start there, if you literally start there, everything else after that will fall into place. Doesn't mean you're not going to have bad days. Doesn't mean you're not going to have challenges, but you will be well equipped to handle them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So some people think, well, if I pray that my life's going to be better. No, your ability to handle your life will be better.
Mm.
So my work has I've been blessed, it's taking off. So I had a little discussion with God and said, hey, I'm going to try to combine two of the most important things on my list together. It won't be perfect, but it'll be good. So I use a prayer app and I pray during my workouts at the first thing in the morning by myself.
Oh, very cool. Yeah.
And I'm probably 85-90% there on the prayer side while I'm exercising. Sometimes I'm paying a little more attention. Sometimes if I'm trying to count reps, maybe not so much.
Sure. Yeah.
But we had a little agreement. I said, look, I this is so important to me. I want to make sure that I do this. So I said to my son, if you can exercise your mind, your body, and your soul as you wake up in the morning, you will be ahead of 99% of the world. And it's not a selfish thing. It means you can contribute. You can set an example for your future kids, and you will be a better husband, and you will be more attentive to your wife. You'll be less self-centered if you wake up and thank God every morning for what you have. Feel free to pray for people that you know that need it, and then get a good sweat going. Dude, just that's it right there, right?
That's perfect.
And then we can dive into more of the other things, but those two things, if you got to get that right, because that's the only time of the day where no one's going to schedule a meeting.
Yeah,
Five
you're
a.m. Yeah.
completely locked in at that point. And if it doesn't happen, so I love that you talk about that this is the very first thing, because if you get too much into the machinations of the day and you start working and
Yeah.
you go into something
Yeah.
else, you're going to get lost.
Oh yeah.
And you might
Yeah.
lose your sense of purpose. So I'm curious, what does this look like for you? If it's while you're doing your workout and you're
Mm-hmm.
combining those two things, do you have a process? Do you just kind of let
Yeah.
it flow? What does that look like? Everybody prays and meditates and
Yeah.
speaks to God in a different way. I'm curious what that looks like for you.
So it's interesting when for the last 3 or 4 years I worked from home because I started my own consulting company after I sold my business, and
Mhm.
that was very unique. So I was always a morning workout guy, but when I worked from home and my kids were out of the house, there was less pressure in the evening for a sports practice or a game or something
Right.
that would come up. And you can't, as a father, come home after working 10, 12 hours and go, see, I'm going to the gym. It just, it doesn't work. You have to jump in and be a parent and be a spouse and contribute. But when I started working from home, by the middle of the day, I craved movement,
Mm.
right? I needed to move my
Mhm.
body versus sitting at a desk by myself. Because in a work environment, in a building, you're moving around, you're talking. It may not be exercise, but at least you're up and out of your
Yeah, you're
chair.
engaged. Yep.
Yeah. So a midday workout was important for me. So I did my meditation and prayer in the morning. It was dark. It's peaceful. I had a process of scripture and some other prayers that I do. And a list of people I wanted to pray for, and it's fairly consistent. It's fairly deep. My dad is a very quiet guy, and literally 5 6 years ago, I was sitting with he and my mom. I'd been home visiting by myself on a business trip. I swung by, and my mom just said, "Hey, you ought to ask your dad to share how he prays."
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So he's got a set of prayers that he goes through, but at three different points or four different points in his prayers, he pauses. And the first time he prays for everyone he knows that is sick or has passed away.
Mm.
And Steve, it blew my mind. There's almost 200 people on the list
So he's actually keeping a list.
in his head.
Wow.
In his head.
Wow.
If I said to my dad, "Hey, my friend Joan is going through breast cancer," she's on the list.
Wow.
And he remembers every one of them. I said to like this, like, oh my God, I suck.
It's amazing.
Dude, how do you do that? And no one knows. My dad's 75. I'm probably the only person that knows he does this. He's never told a soul he does this. Then he pauses again about 15 minutes later, and he prays for world peace.
Mm.
And he prays for leaders. He prays for conflict, soldiers, innocent victims, families of soldiers, soldiers have been injured or killed. It's detailed.
Wow.
It's deep. And then he pauses another 5 10 minutes later, and he prays for his family, every single person in his family, every member, his wife, his kids, anything they might be going through, his grandkids, in depth, And when I heard that, it was amazing to me. And the last set of prayers he does is for himself. Help
Mm.
me be a better husband, father, leader, whatever it is. And I just looked at him like, man, I've been just going through the motions, dude. Like
Wow. Yeah.
that's how you pray.
That's intentional. I mean, that is a well thought out process.
It is a very in-depth process. And you've got kids. We've all got kids who go through they all are at different phases. At one point, one of your kids probably isn't in the place you want them to be, right? And you try to work through and help them with that. But I have found that the impact my father's prayers had on me and my family is visible, and I can feel it on my family, that I shifted that years ago to that process. And by the way, there are days where I'm kind of really into it, and there are days where I'm probably not as into it. So it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be, to your point, intentional.
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes, over the years, I've heard people talk about, well, don't just go through the motions. I take an opposing view to that. I
Yeah.
think that when you go through the motions, every once in a while, emotion starts to come and
Oh
you
yeah.
start to get into a deeper state. But if you're not doing the thing on a regular basis, if you're not praying, if you're not following your process, then it's too hard. I don't know if you have you ever read any of Stephen Pressfield's work. He wrote the book, the War of Art, not the Art of War, but the War of Art.
I have not read that.
So Pressfield is a really well known writer. A lot of people don't know, that he wrote Legend of Bagger Vance,
Oh,
and many best selling books,
amazing.
right?
Yeah.
But at a certain point, he shifted and he wrote this book, The War of Art, and it was basically a what is the war, the battle that you go against every single day when you're trying to create something.
Mm.
And in this very simple book, he details out the process of how to get into a state of inspiration, how to talk to the muse, how to get that creativity flowing. And it's very simple. You just have to overcome the resistance of doing it, and then you do that every single day. He says, "I'm
Yeah.
inspired," and I can't remember how when the time is, but he goes, "Inspiration strikes me at about whatever it is, 8:10 in the morning, every morning, and I've started writing at 7:30." And
Yeah.
when I read that, I thought, yes, go
Yeah.
through the motions because the motions are going to create the emotion and get you into something that is, there's greater depth there. Um, that's a beautiful process that your dad goes through. I want to come back though to something that you said a minute ago, where you said that you can feel it. It's very palpable in your life.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with a friend yesterday, and we have recently connected to have more conversation about life and business. And he's somebody that I've worked with in the past, and we've been friends for, gosh, the better part of 2 decades.
Okay.
After we had chatted, the next day, the very next day, I'm walking into a meeting and I just paused and I could feel the presence of him praying for me. I told him the next day, I said, "Hey, will you just stop doing that?" Because I'm literally walking into the meeting, Ron, and I can feel you praying for me based on our conversation yesterday, that you're praying for me to be successful and accomplish the things that I want to. I said, "Stop doing that. It's distracting to me." And
You
he
know, it's
laughed. He says, "Steve, I can't do that. That's the one thing I will never do for you, is stop praying for you." It is very palpable, right? And
yeah.
I'm curious how you feel that in your life. And also, what are your kids feeling? Because I'm sure as a father, you're praying for them as well, right?
Oh yeah, intensely. Um, you know, I again back to this term evolving, right? In the
Mhm.
evolved man. I'm a very different person than I was 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Mm.
And I think the process that I go through, both physical, mental, and spiritual, or all three of those things in the morning, has allowed me to de-stress my life in a way that I haven't been able to experience before.
Mm.
I don't know that I always put God and prayer first. I got to it, but it wasn't a priority. Same thing with, and the third thing I was going to tell my kids is tithing, right? Give God
Mm.
your first fruits, right? Give him your
Yeah.
first fruits. And you've heard it. I've read it. I've read the that if you do that, God will pay you back tenfold. And you might not be able to touch it. It may not be money. It may not be whatever. But I have found that by doing that, um, God presents miracles in my life in ways I would never expect.
Interesting.
Sometimes it's just the ability to handle a stressful situation with some calm and peace,
Hmm.
um, to just enriching the relationship I have with my wife, right? Recognize how blessed I am to have her in my life, in my kids' life. I don't know that my kids can necessarily feel my prayers yet. I think that they're on their own path and journey in their spiritual lives, and all I can do is by example, let them know how important it is in my life, talk to them when they want to have the conversation. But I recognize that in my 20s, I was in a pretty temporal phase of my life,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
When you shift, and it's funny, my parents are completely over into the spiritual world, to the point where, you kind of laugh and smile. No, no, you're there 5 minutes with them and it's already shifted into religion and with a slant of politics. It's almost too much, right? But they mean
Yeah.
well. And I didn't
Right.
understand it at first, but that's where their life is centered, right? You get reflective, you get
Mhm.
more emotional, you get more spiritual and thoughtful. I'm going to go through that phase. My kids are going to roll their eyes at me too. They
Yeah. Yeah.
might listen to this, go, "Geez, Dad, way to go."
Yeah.
But I'll give you. You asked the right. I think probably, hopefully, one of the ways that they feel prayer is when we're together and they see how I interact with other people,
Mhm.
or they meet people from my past where they can see the depth of that relationship and friendship and know that that's not of this world,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
is that's
Good
that's a
point.
deeper connection.
Good point. That's a pretty powerful thing, isn't it?
Hmm.
My daughter and I had a really cool experience. She wanted to go to the gym. Yeah, this was over the holidays, and she said, "Hey, can we go work out together?" She'd been busy with school, and typically, she doesn't live at home anymore, so she typically works out on her own. She said, "Dad,
Yep.
let's go to the gym together." So we go to the gym, and we ran into somebody, and I introduced her to him, and he's made some comments about me, and we walked away, and I could tell that there was an impact that was made. And like you said, the interactions that we have with other people, when we are focused and intentional, and when we are not just going through life without an intentional focus, we make connections with others that are on a deeper, more spiritual
Hmm.
level. And those are the relationships that last. Those are the things that are not surface level. Those are when heart to heart, mind to mind. You see another person for who they are, they see you, and you create a connection that
Yeah.
is it's more natural and it tends to last longer because as you continue to grow and evolve, so do they.
Yeah.
And there's more maturity in that relationship.
Yeah, without a doubt. I was talking with another kind of a peer mentor of mine the other day, and you know, in a customer facing or when I'm leading a company, and very often I'm at events or conferences or shows, and half of it is networking and shaking hands and dinners and everything. And I have a gregarious personality, might be the way to describe it.
Mhm.
But I share with him, I said, those events absolutely drain me.
Mm,
I do not enjoy it. I go back to my hotel room and I just want to go to sleep.
yeah.
He's like, really? It just seems like it's so natural. I said, that's the thing. It's not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it's like likes on your social media platform. It's so surface level and it's so disingenuous.
Yep.
I thrive in deeper personal relationships with a smaller group of people who I align with. That's where I get my joy. So you asked an interesting question. I guess I can parrot it back this way. I can see my prayer impacting my kids' lives by watching how they interact with other people.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Um, my son, oldest son, just made an introduction to me to a banking connection that my company might use. And I said to the connection, I said, at what point is my son now making me banking introductions, right?
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Right. And um, I see him out in the business world. We had an opportunity to go to a couple of business events together, and watching him interact with other people is just a joy. All of my kids have the ability to do that, which is a blessing. But I know that they're forming deep relationships, and I know that people respect them because they treat other people well. So to me, I think that's where I can see perhaps some of that prayer life manifest itself in their ability to have deep relationships with other people and treat people with kindness and respect. When my oldest son was 18, probably 19, we were at church and we had walked in and we had walked by an older gentleman in a wheelchair, and he was very old and he was in poor health and he was having a hard time kind of engaging. And my wife she has this innate compassion for the elderly, like just
Mm,
incredible compassion. My daughter can manifest itself the same way. I don't know if it comes from the same place, but she's very good with them.
mm,
My younger son, I think he has to go through a bit of a filter to get where it's vulnerable. But on the way back out of church, my oldest son, at 18 or 19, probably in college, knelt down next to this man, held his hand, and looked at him and said, "God bless you. I hope you have a great day." And looked
wow.
him right deep in the eyes and the soul. My wife looks at
Wow.
me. I'm like, well, you don't coach that. I don't know where that comes from.
Yeah, that's natural. That
Yeah.
comes from the soul.
So I appreciate the question. I had to think about it, and maybe those are examples of where God is working through us, right, as parents, to hopefully
Mm.
pass that along to our kids.
I think it's beautiful. And I think it becomes generational too. One of the things that we do in our home is that we um, around, birthdays, when we have a big birthday dinner, we circle the room and sometime at the table or if we're sitting on the couch and we're doing gifts, before we give any physical gift, we give the gift of feedback. And the gift of feedback is essentially, what is it that you appreciate about that person? What is it that you love about that person? So we kind of run the room. um, this year, we've had a pretty crazy first part of the year. We're prepping for a wedding for my oldest. My second daughter went to France on a study abroad. My son graduated high school. We're so busy
Yeah.
that we weren't able to get together. Well, and then I had hernia surgery, and so on Mother's Day, I made food for my wife and our small little family, and then I went to bed, and that was it. So we didn't
Right.
see my mom on Mother's Day. We invited my parents out later on because we wanted to make sure that we got some time with them. So a couple weeks later, we invited my mom and dad out to the house, and I said, "Hey, so this is our tradition that we do on birthdays and holidays. And so, since we are here and, Dad, we may not have everybody here on Father's Day, we're going to do the same thing to you." So we ran the room. We talked about, okay, what do we love about grandma? What do we love about grandpa? And one of the things that my son said As he said, Grandpa, one of the reasons why I work so hard and why I'm building the business that I'm building. This is a kid that's 18 years old, right? He started his business about 7 or 8 months ago. He said, one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because of your example. I've seen how hard you've worked to build the businesses that you built, to develop the wealth that you developed. And I've seen what you've done with it. I've seen how you've created the foundation. I've seen how you have given to other people. And I want to carry on that same thing that you passed on to my dad and that he's passed on to me. And, that is such a powerful generational gift that my 18-year-old son, in fact, our neighbors the other day pulled me aside and they said, "What is going on with your kid? We've never seen anybody so determined and dedicated." Because this kid, he flips couches, right? So we've always got like 3 or 4 sectional couches sitting in our driveway that he's cleaning and getting ready to sell.
Amazing.
He learned all of this generationally by watching me work hard, by that I learned from my dad. There's a lot of power that comes as we pass these gifts along.
Sure.
So giving the gift of feedback, I think, is extremely important, because it helps another person understand what we appreciate about them, but it also instills these habits in the kids that are they'll just stick, right? They
Right.
see the example and they say, okay, well, I'm going to adopt that and I'm going to do it in the future. I want to come back to your list, but I do have to make a quick comment on something you said earlier. I am just like you. I love to go to networking events because I have the opportunity to meet other people, but they
Sure.
drain me to no end. I don't know
Yeah.
if you're like me, but at the end of it, I just will go back to a hotel and I will lay flat on my bed and just stare at the ceiling, sometimes with the TV on, sometimes just staring at the ceiling to decompress, because
Oh
I
yeah.
like the intimacy of a core group rather than this bouncing from one person to the next. So
Yeah.
uh,
Completely agree.
I can definitely relate. Okay, so the first thing you say, there's 4 things with
Yep.
your kids. First thing was prayer.
Yep.
Second is health and fitness,
Exercise. Yeah.
exercise. Third is tithing, so
Yep.
making sure that you give away what you get so that
Yep.
the first fruits to God. What's the
Yep.
fourth?
So the fourth, I think, is investing in your future, right? So I'm an entrepreneur, so I am like I'm the pot calling the kettle black here, right? So
Okay.
I have such a tremendous respect for people who have the discipline and the forethought, and it's no different than exercise. Exercise is a deposit for your future,
Yeah.
right? But I'm really trying to impart on my kids the concept of hitting for average and going for singles and doubles in their financial world. Start early,
Mm,
start in small amounts, do it often, do it consistently, and build up
yeah.
the opportunity to give you some freedom when you're older, right? So we're talking about real estate investment. We're talking about a lot of different things that weren't topics I had with my dad. My dad, was a very frugal, conservative, but we didn't talk about it. We didn't talk about those
Mm,
aspects much. And, it was different. Nowadays, I can see a really good Instagram post on real estate investment or something along those lines and share it with my boys and say, look at this. This makes a lot of sense. Follow this guy. I think his advice is really good. Let's
yeah.
talk about how we do this. Here's the financial advisor we should set you up with. So I think is at the same time, you give your first fruits to God, you got to give the next fruits to your future, right? And as a husband and a father, that's very important. So if you get those 4 building blocks done every day and you hit something really good at the beginning, which is um, the monotony is the beauty of it. The process is the beauty. If you just do it every day,
Mm,
there will be moments of joy. There'll be moments of monotony.
hmm.
I just did a post this week about obesity,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I made the point that look, I do love to exercise, but I don't love every workout,
Hmm.
right? I do love getting up in the morning. It's my favorite time of the day, but there are mornings I want to sleep in.
Yeah.
I do love to eat healthy. I love the joy of healthy food, but I do like chips and cookies. I mean, I'll be the first person. You throw a good chocolate chip cookie in front of me, people at a restaurant freak out. Where I'll try that. They're like, "You eat that?" I'm like, "Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah." Not a lot, but I.
Yep.
So it's get your faith, get your fitness, tithe, and then invest in your future. And then you go 6 or 5 through 10 are Make sure that your loved ones know that you love them every day.
So
That's
important.
more than it's more than just "I love you" as a word. It's in your actions, and those are things that, as a parent and as a husband, I've always said. There are times where I go to bed at night going, "Man, I should have been a better husband or father today. I shouldn't have said that, or why did I do that? What was I thinking?" Um, and that's where they're not ready to be spouses or parents yet. So we're going to get to lists 5 through 10 as they enter those phases. But I figure
Yeah.
if they cover the
Yeah.
first 4 today and they get right with the Lord, then that will start to take care of itself.
I love that. And I love the idea or the fact that you're doing this right now, right? The fact that you're teaching these things at every stage. I mean, I think back to when my kids were young. When my kids were young, it was easy to be a dad, right? Being a dad, when the kids are young, I basically just had to be a little bit silly, had to be a little bit
Mm-hmm.
goofy. I had a few jokes. Most of them were fart joke related because that was the thing that made them laugh the most.
Sure.
But then over time, becoming a dad meant much more. And there was an evolution in my toolbox. There was an evolution in my skill set that had to happen. And when they became teenagers, when they moved past those teenage years and they started to go past high school and now into college, and now I've got one getting married. The toolbox never gets filled up, right? The toolbox just continues to have to expand. The skill set continues to have to expand. I'm curious from your perspective, what has changed as a father as you've gotten from a kid or a father of young kids to now a father of adults? What's evolved or what's changed for you the most?
Well, it's a great question, and we didn't even tee that up earlier, but I'm glad you asked it. There's 3 things that I can tell you um, modified, adjusted, or completely evolved my approach to parenting.
Okay.
And I'll give the first 2 are more generic, than the third one's a pretty specific example. So the first 2 are I had to, and you mentioned this, I had to make the switch from being fun and silly and energetic and being that dad to less becoming their friend and more becoming their parent.
Mm-hmm.
So boundaries,
Good point. Good point. Yep.
holding the line, letting them know there's just lines that can't be crossed. And if you do a good job as a parent early on, that is a very natural and easy transition. And here's what I mean. When your kids are babies and little and you say, don't put your finger in the outlet, and you've had a long day at work and you're sitting on the couch, you just sat down, and for a lot of dads, they crack the beer, flip on the news, and kick their feet up and want to just chill.
Yep.
When that kid puts their finger up at the outlet and you say, don't do that, and they look at you and they give you that kid look like, well, I'm going to do this now that I know you don't want me to.
Mm-hmm.
And they try it again. If you don't follow through right then and there, you're screwed.
Yeah.
You got to walk up. You got to remove them from the situation. If they try it again, you got to slap their hand, and that might get a lot of people wired. But they got to know I shouldn't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
That got my dad up. That I got a reaction that says I shouldn't do that. They don't have to understand why.
Mm-hmm.
They just have to know that if you say that's a boundary you don't cross, they don't cross it.
Yeah.
What parents don't realize is that's but parenting is really freaking hard.
It's not easy. Everybody,
It's not,
each one of them's different. And so
right?
it's different for
You
each
nailed
one,
it.
right?
You nailed it. So that's actually my third point, which I'll get to. You've hit it spot on, right? So transitioning from fun and goofy and whatever, and I think dads, my wife stayed at home with the kids. We're very blessed. She's wired to be a mom. It was her thing. She's like, and she's all in. She's just an amazing mother, now grandmother. That was her thing. So, you know, husbands sometime in that situation, or dads, or whoever the person that's at work has the opportunity to come home and sometimes always be the good cop, right?
Yeah.
They,
Yeah.
they weren't there all day drawing lines and boundaries, so it was easy. So I recognized that I had to transition from that to setting some more clear boundaries. The second thing is, I think it sounds to me, just with your process at birthdays where you ask what you love about people, that feedback loop. I don't think I was good at that.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
Okay.
I don't think I was good at that at work or as a father. I've evolved. I've learned. I've recognized it's something I need to work on. Part of it is because I I I'm always I always see the best in people. almost to a fault, and I'm always rooting for them, and I don't intentionally enjoy conflict.
Mm.
I can handle it, but I don't seek it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my wife will go head on into one of the kids if they're doing something she doesn't like, and we're fortunately on complementary ends of the spectrum. We figured out how to balance that and work in the middle. Sometimes I gotta like, hey, peel it back a little bit, let them make the mistake. You can't do that. And sometimes she's with me, you need to get her and head this thing off.
Mm-hmm.
And it's worked amazing well in our marriage and as parents. So I'm very lucky that I married a woman who's the exact complement to the skills that I don't have,
Yeah.
and vice versa. So just very blessed that way. So, number one, shifting from funny dad to parent. Number two, understanding how to give feedback and dig into situations a little more aggressively
Mm-hmm.
with a balance, right? Always with love in mind, but letting them know that this is serious. It gets to the third point, which you just mentioned. All my kids are different.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter is 3 years older than her younger brother, and he's 5 years older than the youngest one. So there's an 8-year gap between the first and the third. My daughter is, I call her my stone cold killer. She just is like this all the time until somebody does something that doesn't align with what she wants to happen. A switch can flip, and she can just be sometimes downright nasty, right? It just and it
Yeah.
because she's very intelligent, she's very witty, and sometimes that comes out so sarcastic it can be nasty.
Yeah. Yeah.
And but 90% of the time she's just like this. So she was an easy baby. She's a really good athlete, very focused, did well in school. So, and she dated her now husband for 9 years before they got married. So through high school, they were an item, and he's a wonderful young man. So I didn't have any of that drama. It was kind of easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, my oldest son, when he was a freshman in high school, he's a lot like my wife. He wears his emotions heavily on his sleeves. He's a deep carer, hard worker, so he can hit the boundaries really quick.
Mm.
And it was in the middle of one of my startups. Money was tight. I was stressed. I was working hard, working late, and we had set up a little library in our house where I had my desk, and there was a desk for the kids to do work. And he was working on something, and he kind of got a little snippy with my wife, and then he snipped at me. Steve, I freaking lost it. I went on a verbal onslaught to that kid and just let him have it.
Mm.
It was the right thing to do. How I did it was wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been there
Yeah, and I sat
multiple
back
times.
at instead of my wife that night. That can never happen again. That's on me. And she said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Vin doesn't communicate this way. I'm communicating the way I wanted to communicate, not the way he's 13 years old. He doesn't know how he communicates yet. He doesn't
Yeah.
he
Yeah.
doesn't know how to process what we just did there. What
Mm-hmm.
we did was wrong, but I've got to so I literally, to your point, had to change 100% the way I interfaced with him. And he's an incredible young man. We have a great from that day forward, we didn't have one of those again.
That's great.
And I've never had another one with any one of my kids. And it changed the way I approach people I work with as well. I had to recognize I've got to interface with everyone I work with differently too. So that was a very long-winded answer to a great question.
That's a great answer, and it sparks, I think, even more conversation about this topic because, like you, there are moments where I look back and I think, okay, right thing, wrong execution, and I did that multiple times. Right intention, right thing, wrong execution, and I believe that when we execute things poorly, I think one of the best things we can do as a parent is apologize. And
100%.
to do so in a way that doesn't diminish what needs to be,
Mm-hmm.
but do so in a way that clearly calls out the behaviors, the tonality, whatever it is that was wrong.
Yep.
And so that's something that my kids and I have had multiple conversations about. My son and I in particular, because he was one that would continually push the button and overstep the bounds. And we would have those conversations. And sometimes when I did I wasn't close to being my absolute best.
Correct.
Right thing, right boundaries set, wrong way of handling it. And so I learned early on in his life to learn how to give and develop the art of the apology. And when I say the art of the apology, I'm not talking about that I became very good at apologizing and then
Yeah.
not changing. I believe that great
Yeah.
art has substance to it. I'm curious, in your life, as you've looked back at some of those moments, how have you leaned into the art of the apology?
Um, I think it's where uh, I think it's where men in general, which is why I appreciate so much of your content, struggle with the line of um, vulnerability and masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not talking about toxic masculinity, which I think is ridiculous.
Right.
Um, when you teach your kids that it's okay to make a mistake and okay to acknowledge it, it opens up a new world for them, right? Um, whether it's entrepreneurship, right? It's okay to make a mistake. I can try something new.
Yep.
It's also good for them to recognize that as a parent, you're not going to be perfect.
Mm-hmm.
You can't hold yourself to that standard. And if you can acknowledge to your kids when you make a mistake, now there are all sorts of mistakes that parents can make, right? Whether I lose my cool at a specific point in time, or snap at someone, or embarrass them. Sometimes I embarrass them intentionally. I'm not apologizing for that.
Same.
Uh,
Yeah.
but I here's where I think a lot of people make a mistake. Your apologies need to be few and authentic. If you think you can F up and just apologize for it and it becomes rote, you've lost them.
Yeah.
There's no trust, there's no authenticity, there's no moral, ethical lines that are crossed. So definitely okay to apologize, but you should not make that same mistake again.
Yeah.
That's the one. And it doesn't mean you're gonna pivot and change, but boy, and there are some things apologies just won't make up for, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's really, really good to apologize, but you have to lead a life where you're trying to do the right thing every time. You may not do it every time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so my dad probably would maybe have had to make 3 or 4 apologies to me in my entire life, and I don't know when he would have had to. I think in my post I said I've never seen him intentionally ever do the wrong thing. Doesn't mean um, he always made the correct decision, right?
Right. Right.
But I never saw him intentionally take a shortcut or do the wrong thing or treat someone poorly. And so if he did apologize, I would know how meaningful that would be.
Yeah. Because it has impact. It's not something that's just thrown out there with
Correct.
no action behind it. There's no integrity, right?
Hmm.
The way I look at integrity, I think so many people get integrity wrong. They think it's just honesty. And while there
Hmm.
is honesty within integrity, integrity is integratedness. It's thought, word, action lining up. The building that I'm in is integrous if everything is lined up and it's strong and it's stable and it's structurally sound, right? My
Yep.
life is integrous if what I believe, what I say, and what I do are integrated and they are aligned, right? So I think it comes down to having that integrity that if the apology is there, then the follow up is there as well. If I'm
Yeah.
just constant, oh, I'm sorry. And then I just keep doing the same thing. Well, you're not sorry, right? I
No.
mean, you're
And
just
you don't.
not.
And you made a very good distinction. I mean, honesty is a component of integrity. Integrity is demonstrated. Is a demonstrated thing, right? When
Mhm.
you have integrity, it means your actions are rooted in the right intention. You have authentic compassion, remorse.
Yep.
That's where integrity comes from. I have three hot buttons that my kids know. My wife knows.
Okay.
I have three hot buttons. Number one is dishonesty.
Okay.
Um, if you lie to me, it breaks down the first part of our relationship was trust. I still love you. I love you unconditionally. But if I can't trust you, it changes our relationship dramatically.
Yeah. Big time.
So dishonesty is one of the top hot buttons for me. And my kids have recognized it. Like if they fall on their sword and say I did this and they own it, boy, it's a very different reaction you get from me.
Hmm.
We talk about it, what happened, why'd you do it, what are you going to do to do better? But there's no anger, there's no whatever, and there might be a repercussion, but it's talked about and open. Like, well, that deserves this, right? Yep, I get it. The second one is laziness.
Okay.
I do not resonate with lazy people.
Yeah. Yeah.
They get under my skin. Uh, I have to bite my lip, like literally bite my tongue and go, right? In my last post, I talked about, and you talked about this early on, the obesity trend in our country, right? And everybody
Yeah.
wants to blame their genetics. They want to blame society. No one wants to own it themselves.
Mhm.
And when I see a 40-year-old, otherwise healthy person who's morbidly obese riding a scooter at Disney so they can get first in line
Yeah.
while their kids are walking next to them, that's pure ass laziness and it pisses me off.
Yeah. Yeah.
When I see someone taking a shortcut, it could be as simple as, let's say I'm painting a fence with one of my kids. There's a right way to paint a fence.
Hmm.
There's 100 ways that are wrong to paint a fence. You do it right, you do it clean, you do it with detail, and you do it well. If you cut any of those corners, it's going to get me. And I get that from my dad. My dad always did the right. He did the project right. And
Yeah.
sometimes it took a little longer. So I don't like dishonesty and laziness. My third one is I just don't like meanness. I don't like mean people.
Mm.
If I see someone picking on someone that can't defend themselves, I'm stepping in. Just don't like it. Don't like that person. And that is another area where you can see me go from nice guy to a switch flip in about 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I don't know why those are hot buttons for me. Maybe, but um, they're hot buttons.
Yeah. I'm with you on all three. I think I've
Yeah.
probably got a couple of others that are my hot buttons, but those three are mine as well. Um, and my kids know that if like the trust thing, right? I mean,
Yeah.
trust, honesty, and respect are the foundations for every relationship.
There you go. Yeah.
Love is always going to be there with family. You're
Yep.
always going to love. You're always going to have that unconditional love. But trust, honesty, and respect are the foundation. And if you don't trust in that relationship, everything else crumbles. If the honesty and the transparency isn't there, if the respect for each person as their own individual is not there, then the relationship crumbles. You might have love for them, but there's no way that it's going to grow, flourish, and turn into something if you don't have those foundational pieces.
Yeah. And if you break trust, if it's deeply broken, it's so hard to repair.
Yeah, it's doable, but it's difficult, right?
Yeah. When I went up to New York with my son a few weeks ago to help him find an apartment,
Mm-hmm.
and he's 6'4" kids, good looking kid. He's very personable. People are naturally drawn to him, and God bless him. That's an amazing gift. But we went out with his roommate and his dad, and we met a bunch of other alumni that are up there as well. It's kind of neat to see 30 other kids from his school making their way up in New York City. But we went to a couple bars and a couple clubs, and I said, Sammy, you are in the belly of the beast, buddy.
Yeah, yeah,
You are in the belly of the beast. And we talked about it. I said, you got a very serious, wonderful girlfriend. She's not in the city with you right now. These next years are going to be very important to how you live with yourself. And I said, the reason I've been married for 32 years to a wonderful woman is we trust each other implicitly. That doesn't mean I take her for granted.
mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean I assume she's always going to be there no matter what. And, I can be a jerk. No, I literally trust her
Mm-hmm.
and she can trust me. And I said, part of the reason is I've never put myself in a situation where I couldn't do the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I travel a lot for work. I do a lot of things. I'm not going out to the nightclub or going down to the restaurant bar by myself.
Yeah.
I'm not doing those things. When I get in those situations, I exit stage left. If that happens, it's not because I don't trust myself to do the right thing. It's just not the right thing,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then my wife now knows that that's how I operate. And I said, I felt that way the moment we got married. Like, this isn't, I want you to understand, this isn't a sacrifice for me. It's not hard for me. I don't want you
Right.
to feel like, oh, yeah, it's not hard. It's actually somewhat easy because I love my wife and I love my kids. So that's not a lot of, well, yeah, it's not hardship. So that trust thing, that's a verbal lesson we're trying to convey along the lines. And he's a good kid. I don't expect, I'm not saying he's not going to do this, but he's going to be in situations he's never been in before.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Life's going to throw him,
Yeah.
especially in New York. I mean, if he's there, he's going to experience a
Yeah.
lot of different things that he wouldn't have experienced at home.
At a pace and intensity that's hard to replicate. Yep.
Yeah. Pete, I want to come back to this concept of failure as a teacher. Experience really has changed my perspective over the years. I think one of the most important things that I teach my kids is through my mistakes, my failings, and my shortcomings. Um, I used to think that I needed to work really hard to do the right thing, to show the right thing. And that in a way, there was like this perfection that I was trying to attain in the way that I behaved around them. I think the successes that they achieve that go beyond what I've been able to have been a point of success, like true success in life for me, because
Sure.
if they can recognize and learn from my failures, I think that's a big part of me being successful as a father. Now, that doesn't mean I go out there trying to make mistakes, right?
Right.
But if they can learn from my failings and my shortcomings, I believe that that can help them to be even better, especially if I'm open and honest about it.
Sure.
I'd love to get your perspective on how, as a father, you view failure.
Well, I mean, heck, I started a podcast called Eating Crow. So you know, I I find it more beneficial for me to share either the mistakes I've made or my failures, the observations of others I've seen make mistakes. Obviously, not by name, right,
Mhm.
but by
Right,
caricature.
right.
There's enough people out there posting the life you think I lead, right? Like the successes and
Yeah, yeah.
the Instagram and Facebook facades.
The
A
perfect
lot of
life.
people saying, "Oh, yeah, how great they are." I don't think I don't think. Well, first of all, I just don't resonate that way. I can't. Maybe because I don't have enough content, right? I can't point to enough successes to go, "Hey, here you go," right?
There you
I'd run
go.
out of
Yeah,
content in about a week.
yeah.
But so I consider the opportunity to discuss failure with my kids on two fronts. One is a husband and as a father, right? They've seen me at my best. They've seen me at my worst.
Mhm.
By talking about it and recognizing where some of those mistakes came from and how I've tried to overcome them. But also, it's important for them to know that while the line may be going up and down like this, it's trying always to go up to the right. In
Yeah,
general, that it's
yeah.
just trying to go up to the right. So they know I'm on the right trajectory, even though there might be some mistakes along the way. From a business perspective, I think my kids have had the blessing or the curse, whatever you call it, to see what entrepreneurship is really like.
Mhm.
I was doing pretty well in the corporate world, probably on a pretty good trajectory. Could have lived a comfortable life, maybe very comfortable, who knows. But when I stepped off to move into the entrepreneurial space, first as a hired gun in a couple startups, and then starting my own companies, um, you know, uh, I'd say the two that I've started, one is its success is yet to be determined. I think it's going to do okay, but it was a long run. I went without an income with three kids getting ready to go to college for a couple of years.
Mm,
So, sold the house, sold the cars, took all my
mm.
investment, took on a bunch of debt. So my kids know the difference between a need and a want pretty hard, right?
Yeah,
There were
yeah.
times, I'll share a story. And I don't share this stuff very often, but there were times in that period where my wife would have to text me and say, "Are we okay for me to buy toilet paper today?
Wow.
Like, do we have enough money in the bank to spend $5?"
Mm.
Um, I don't think a lot of people recognize that a lot of entrepreneurs go through that phase.
Yeah, yeah.
And we went all in, right? And it was intense. So I don't say this. There are people who lose their job or become ill and have to face those things not by their own choice, right? Just really
Right.
bad luck.
Yeah.
I steered myself in that direction, so I owned it. I couldn't. There was no complaining. There was no nothing.
Yeah.
My youngest son used to read voraciously. Still, though, loves to read. So I told him, if you read a book or a series of books and they do a movie on it, I will take you to the movie because you've read the books.
Hmm.
So there was a movie that had come out of a series of books he'd read, and um, I said, we're going to go to the movie. It was at the Dollar Theater. And I said, we can go into the dollar store and buy one thing of candy that you can bring into the movie theater with you. And I literally had $3.40 to my name when we
Wow.
did this.
Wow.
So we got 2 tickets for $1. He bought a pack of Milk Duds or something. I don't know what it was. And he had no idea. By the way, he's a lady. He thinks this is the greatest thing ever, right? Which is
Hmm.
awesome.
Yeah.
My older kids knew. My older kids knew what was going on. But I'm standing in line at the dollar store, and I looked around me, and I could see people doing their grocery shopping there
Wow.
and getting into a 35-year-old car with no hubcaps and raising their kids. And for me, I thought to myself, okay, you're here intentionally, Pete. You could go get a job. You could do whatever. You could switch this flip. You could flip this switch right now if you wanted to. But you have always got to remain open minded and keep the perspective that you are in a very different place than a lot of people. And you better remember that, buddy. So my daughter wrote a college application paper about how she paid our rent one summer while she was in high school
Wow.
for us. And she got a scholarship as a result. So she wrote the story about I know the difference between a need and a want. We live in a very nice area. There's a lot of affluent people. A lot of my friends of mine done very well. So um, when my kids would get a $20 pair of Van sneakers from the outlet store, they would sleep with them.
Mm.
Like just hug them and smell them and sleep with them. Like
Mhm.
that was the coolest thing they got in a long time. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, I don't know if I would call it a failure. You could call it a failure. You could call it a tough lesson, but I think my kids have recognized, and I think I said this earlier, it's okay to hit singles and doubles and plant seeds for long-term success. But it's a lot less stressful way to go. But if you want to become an entrepreneur, here's what it's really like. Go into it eyes wide open, set yourself up for financial success so you don't have to depend on this being sweet. We've now given them lessons that I think are very important for them to recognize what failure does look like and how some people don't necessarily talk about it.
That's a powerful, powerful story, and something that I'm sure your kids are going to hold on to for the rest of their life.
Yeah,
It,
hopefully.
it makes me think about a conversation I had the other day. So I sat down with my bookkeeper to go over some of the financials. And as we were going through the financials for my Evolve business, and then she's now starting to take on, putting the financials in for this other business that I'm doing with my son. Um, I just mentioned a conversation that I had had with my son prior to. So the way that our it works is my son and I sit down on Fridays and we run through the business and we talk about, okay, what do you have in inventory? What's going on? And I use this as a time for us to connect and discuss the business, but also use it as a moment to teach. This is how you grow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, she looked back at me and she said, Steve, I know a lot of men who don't know anything about what you just said. And the fact that you're teaching that to your son at this age is priceless. Now, I've always believed that as a dad, it's not just my responsibility to provide for them, but
Mm-hmm.
and in terms of financial, right?
Yeah.
Here's your
Yeah.
clothes, here's your food. Like I think that's a given. It has to be there.
Yep.
But I think that part of what a father needs to do is to provide knowledge and skills that will lead them to a better life when they grow up and when they go out on their own.
Yeah.
So obviously you've taught this to your kids as they're going throughout life. Are there other practical skills that you've focused on, other tactical things that you've said, hey guys, you need to know this? Um, and if so, why? Why were those the things that you taught them?
Boy, that's such an important topic. Yeah, I think in the post that inspired this conversation about Father's Day. Yeah, I definitely think it's our job to provide for them in the basic skills and things they need to grow up. But then it's part of our job to let them make mistakes to learn along the way,
Yeah.
while at the
Yeah.
same time coaching them. So, in addition to the things you mentioned, which is maybe imparting potentially some business knowledge or
Mhm.
whatever it might be, certainly health, fitness, spiritual life, those are to me, the core building blocks.
Yeah.
Where I've tried to extend that, and this comes directly from my dad. I was the oldest of five kids. My dad is a master carpenter, electrician, plumber, business. He can do all those things. So he created projects and things around the house in order to pass those things along to me.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So in high school, he's like, let's make a go kart
Mm.
from scratch. Like he ran an engineering company. We had a welding shop, fab shop, machine shop. So we started to make a go kart from a snowmobile engine, which would have been pretty fast.
Yeah.
And we ended up we had a little scope creep one night and ended up about two Volkswagen Beetles and made a full street legal dune buggy. We
That's
welded the
amazing.
created a frame from scratch, welded the whole frame, did the research, figured out how to balance it, load it,
Wow.
rebuilt the engine, built the drivetrain. We built a street legal car from scratch.
Wow. That's
And
amazing.
then he sold it the day I got my driver's license because there's no way you're driving this.
He knew where that path would end.
He was a smart guy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
whether it was woodworking or how to change the oil in a car, how to change a tire, how to handle basic electrical work or project, or how to hang a ceiling fan, right? Fix
Mm.
a sink.
Hmm.
So I'm so grateful that those basic skills. And by the way, I enjoy those things. We talk about how a business conference would be draining. You know, what would be energizing for me is if I woke up on a Saturday morning and I had a list of 10 projects to do, and I was able to do them and check them off the box. I just love home
That's so
improvement projects.
satisfying. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love,
Yeah.
whether it's adding recessed lighting or, building furniture or adding a window or remodel. Those to me are skills that very, very few men our age have anymore.
Hmm.
My oldest son will try anything. He's gravitated towards it. My daughter she can cook and she can do art and she can do a lot of other things that aren't the same. My son-in-law wants no part of most of those projects, but he's also literally a genius and a world-class athlete. He's got like literally a genius. So
Nice.
he could do the thinking projects.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I'll do the home remodeling. And my youngest son, I think he'll leverage the yellow pages.
Hey, that's also a skill, right?
It is. And my brother is the same way. He's like, I figured out how to be really good at saying 1-800 plumber, right?
Nice. Nice.
So I think that would be some additional things I would pass along is just basic, I'll call them parenting, husband, take care of your own house skills.
I love that. So I want to come to, we've referenced this a few times, but I want to come to the post that had sparked this
Hmm.
conversation. In this recent post you had put out there, you listed 5 examples of fatherhood that your dad had imparted to you
Hmm.
without ever saying a word. I love that part of it. Let me just pause there for a second because,
Sure.
as they say, still waters run deep, right? And I think
Hmm.
oftentimes when there's a depth of knowledge, when there's a depth of emotional intelligence, when there's a depth of spiritual intelligence, there might not be a lot of talking, right? It just, you see it, you feel it, but
Yeah.
the other person doesn't necessarily have to say it. So I love that part. But I want to talk through each one of these things that your dad had imparted to you. You mentioned that the first one was always do the right thing. How did he teach you to always do the right thing?
Um, I think there was probably some glaring examples. A lot of it was just subtle. So we were one of my first homes. I was adding a deck on the back of the house, and it was a project my dad and I would do together. And he and I think my brothers would feel the same way. My dad and I worked very naturally together. He wouldn't have to ask for the tool; I was already handing it to him.
Mm.
And I love the way his brain worked. We're both engineers. Well, we got about uh, 2/3 of the way framing the deck, and one of us, probably me, measured on the wrong side of a 4x4.
Oh, okay.
So one part of the corner of the deck was just off by 3.5 inches. And we had, we'd already propped the posts in, they were cemented, you know. And I said, Dad, it's okay. I'll just shim it out and we cover it with the fascia in the top deck. No one will know. We'll just shim it out. And I had to run to Home Depot to get some other parts. I'd come back. He had ripped that section of the deck out
Mm.
and was rebuilding it. And I said, Dad, he goes, no, not going to go to sleep tonight knowing I didn't do that right.
Yeah. Wow.
So, and there, just whether it's how he treated someone, when he did a project, he didn't miss a detail. He didn't cut a corner. He didn't cover anything up or take a shortcut. He just did it the right way. And I just so appreciated how that worked. I saw how he treated my mom. My mom and my parents. It's funny. I try to tell my brothers and sisters, if we drew a pie chart
Mhm.
for each one of my siblings about what ratio we have of our mom and dad of each other, we probably would draw it very differently than we actually perceive it ourselves.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. I have a lot of my dad in me. My mom is a very vocal personality. I do have a large percentage of that as well. She has the same caring, generous heart as my dad. But my dad made it very, very clear. Your mom came first,
Mhm.
then you came. If you ever ask me to choose between you or her, she wins every time.
Mm.
Right. And by the way, he demonstrated it a lot. And somehow that just resonated to me as that's kind of you do the right thing, whether it's easy or not. And it's never wrong to make the right decision.
Yeah, so it goes back to that idea of how you do anything is how you'll do everything, right?
Bingo. Exactly. There you go.
My dad's way of saying that to me one time when I had talked back to my mom is he said, "Hey, come into my office for a second." We sat down in the home office. He says, "Let me just explain something to you. Your mom's number one. You're number two. I will always love you, but if you ever talk to your mom like that again, I'm going to knock you into next week." And that was it.
That
That was the last time we had
resonated.
that conversation. Yeah.
Yep. Resonated.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I think great dads have the ability to say something with very few words.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was very few words, but it made the impact on me. Okay, so number two, be kind even when it's not earned.
Hmm. Um, you know, I had seen my dad in situations where people were rude or didn't handle themselves the right way, and he would somehow deflect it and diffuse the situation. He just used kindness at all times. I have seen my dad twice in my life where someone threatened his family and the gloves would come off.
Mm.
One of them, he still reacted with the same kindness and patience. Two, I saw my dad ready to kill someone.
Mm.
Like literally he was ready to take someone's life in defense of his family. The one where we don't go into that in detail. The one where he maintained kindness. My parents, wonderful example, always brought us to a food program in downtown Milwaukee when I grew up. Once a month, we'd go in and we'd feed the homeless, and they got us to interact with them, right? Like we were serving them drinks and waiting on tables and doing whatever. When we were old enough, we could pour coffee and then we wouldn't spill it, whatever. And it was a wonderful experience, just a great, it's a genius parenting, just a great experience for my parents to go, hey, just so you know, you're a pretty lucky kid.
Mhm.
And here's why.
Yeah.
Well, one night, and by the way, my two sisters were 12 years younger than me. They were, at this point, all they could really do was hand someone a tray. And then my dad was at the first station handing out, I think, sloppy joes, and my daughters hand the trays. And you're really instructed to give kind of everybody one serving, so there's enough for everybody that's in the hall. And if there's anything left over, perhaps, and maybe they could do that. And one guy came up and he wanted some more. And my dad very politely said, I'm very sorry, but we have to make sure we have enough for everybody. If there is, you'd be happy to come back up and get some more. And the guy didn't want to hear it.
Mm.
And he started to get berated and really irate. And my sisters at this point in time are probably 5 and 6, standing right
Wow.
next to my dad.
Mhm.
This guy took his tray and broke it over my dad's head.
Wow.
And my dad was a collegiate wrestler, raised in a farm. He's 5'8", but the dude can take care of himself.
Hmm.
And all he did was just push my sisters behind him to make sure they were okay, wiped his face off, and said, I think what was his name? Lucas. Lucas, come here. And Lucas was the guy that ran the kitchen. He's a big, big, wonderful man. And he just said to me and my mom, take the girls. And then they just politely took the guy outside.
Hmm.
Didn't raise his voice, didn't do anything, just total cool.
I love that
Total cool.
story.
Yeah.
I love that. Okay, so always do the right thing. Be kind, even when
Hmm.
it's not earned. Number three, hard work when
Hmm.
nobody is looking.
Yeah, I think it ties back to do the right thing. My dad had an ability to work all day. My grandpa had a farm my dad grew up on, and my dad probably worked his ass off on that farm way more than people realize. And I was the oldest, so I was probably the only kid that really got to go spend quite a bit of time on the farm. But on a Saturday, we'd get up early. My grandma made us breakfast in this iron skillet. She'd make toast and eggs, and then we'd go work the farm all day. And he just worked like a dog. I mean, it was incredible to watch what he did and the pace he did it. And he always had a smile, and he just he just grinded. He had hernias.
Almost
He
like
had
work is a privilege, right?
work as a privilege. It's it's to your earlier points, two lessons, Jimmy. It's emotion. It is
Yeah.
emotion
Yeah.
you go through. If you go through the motion and if you're capable of hard work over a consistent period of time, the world is your oyster,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Exercise, diligence. It's just an innate skill, and he had that skill. He had hernia surgery when he's probably in his mid 40s, my guess, early
Yeah.
40s. And back then, it wasn't as arthroscopic as it is now,
No, no.
right?
Mine was
He can't.
3 holes, patch it up. I was in the gym lifting on machines, not
Yeah,
heavyweight. 3 days later. Not the case
yeah,
back then.
not the case. So what did he do? He came home and insulated our attic the day of the surgery, Steve.
Of course he
And
did.
he climbed down out of the attic, which was probably
Wow.
120 degrees,
Yeah.
puked, and passed out in the hallway.
Wow.
And then he literally looked at me and goes, that probably wasn't a good idea. You think? But I mean, there was
maybe,
there
maybe you're right, Dad.
there was no way I could ever say no to a project or not do my best. You had to.
Yeah. Because you
I just
knew
didn't
he
want to let
was
him down.
setting that example. He's
Yeah,
outworking you.
didn't want to let him down.
What a beautiful example. All right. So number four was if you're honest with me, I can trust you.
Yeah, it gets back to the hot buttons I talked about before. I will naturally extend trust to almost everyone. It's just, and by the way, I think that's a graceful. I'd rather go through life naturally trusting people than the other way.
Yeah.
It's just
Same.
a less stressful way to go life. I've been burned a couple times
Yeah. Yeah.
as a result. Um,
It's easy to be when you do it
it,
that way.
it is easy to be, and I've been burned in once in a startup that cost me a tremendous amount of money. It cost me the trust of some of my investors and my boards, not because of something I did, something somebody else did, but I was on watch.
Mm.
And those lessons are difficult for me. So I'm an intensely loyal guy. Um, I'm working with a couple guys right now who I've known for only about 6 months, but they've proven themselves that if I'm not there and some shit's hitting the fan, they will handle it.
Mm.
I can trust them to may not be the correct decision, but to make what they think is the right decision at the time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm always okay with that. If we make an incorrect decision, I'm always okay with that if the intentions were good.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, for me, it's simple. If I can trust you, then I will extend you a lot of grace and a lot of rope, and you will get the best from me as well.
So this last one I think is really it's a message, honestly, from my perspective, that more parents need to hear because it's not taught today.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone gets a trophy. Everything is okay. If you
Yeah.
are this, that, or the other, it's all okay. We just need to accept everything. Right. And
Mm-hmm.
that's just not the case. This last one that your dad taught you, I think more fathers need to hear it. More fathers need to teach it because it's something that is, at least from my perspective, the linchpin when it comes to success for kids, right? They have to learn this message. If they don't learn this message, then they will be living in a ceramic vase that has to be carried around on a pillow for the rest of their life. Otherwise, their entire world is shattered. And that
100%.
lesson is, I'll let you fail, but I'll be there when you need me.
Yeah. It is, again, I'm very blessed. My dad, he didn't, again, he didn't say a lot. Um, there were moments when I know he probably wasn't very proud of me or didn't like me as much, and he didn't say much about it. And I think there were times I would have appreciated him saying a little more as a course correction,
Sure.
but he was a natural at letting you fail. And then if I ever needed my dad to this day, I could call him and he would drop everything
Yeah.
and be there.
Yeah.
But partly because he knows that I've kind of made enough mistakes to learn to be my own man. Um, a lot of parents are afraid to let their kids fail. They don't know the difference between being there and helicopter parenting. I'll
Mm.
share a silly example of what our society is doing today. So my kids all swam in the summer swim team. So it was fun,
Mhm.
but my wife's a genius. They were out of the house every morning early. The kids were swimming and exercising, and then she can engage them outdoors all day long, bring them home tired. It was just a really great way. They're very
Yeah.
comfortable in the water. They competed a little bit, but that was the one sport where, if my kid got out of the water in eighth place and said, "Can I have some Skittles?" I'd be like, "Yeah, let's go get you some Skittles. Good job. Had a great
Yeah.
time."
Right.
But we weren't taking it seriously. So my wife was always the clerk of course. She said, "I got to go to the bathroom. Can you take over for a while?" It's midway through the meet. I don't know. It's a freestyle. Some dad walks up to me with his 12-year-old son, who I can tell plays a lot of Xbox. Right.
Good description.
Yep. He said,
Yeah. Yeah.
"Where's my kid's ribbon?" I said, "Well, I'm sorry. What's your child's name?" He said, "Tommy, whatever." I said, "Well, Tommy was in Heat 8. He basically came in 56th place.
Mm.
Um, there's no ribbon for 56th place." She goes, "Well, I want my kid to have a ribbon. He deserves a
Wow.
ribbon."
Wow.
And I looked at him. I said, "Well, tell Tommy to swim faster."
Nice.
He's like, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, if you want a ribbon, you have to swim faster." By the way, and swimming might not be your thing, but I'm not giving Tommy a ribbon.
Yeah.
And he stormed off, and I'm like, "Oh, that kid's screwed. He's
Yeah.
just
Uh,
he is screwed."
we've created the problem that, and here's the thing, we won't get into this on this particular conversation, but
Yeah,
we grew up as a certain generation, right? A Gen Xer, I think we're about the same age, right? I'm
yeah,
15 or 49. Um, we grew up in this generation where we had to do a lot of stuff, right?
mm,
Drinking out of the
yeah.
garden hose,
Oh yeah,
not really wearing seatbelts. Like we grew up in a generation where oftentimes our parents were busy. They were doing other things. Like I remember as a kid, I would leave the house in the morning. I just knew I had to be back home, for dinner at a certain time. My parents parented, but the 80s were a totally different time, right?
oh yeah,
And today we have created, I say we because I'm taking it on for the whole generation. We have created children that are not tough. They are not resilient. They are not determined and dedicated. They are weak, soft, um, all of those things. And there's an expectation that they should have so many things that they don't deserve. But we
right.
did that, right? I
Oh yeah,
mean, I can't look at that and say, oh, well, these kids these days, well, that's our fault, right? That's our fault
right.
as a generation for what we've created. And I have vehemently pushed against that with my kids, that
Yep.
we're not going to lean into this common narrative. And whenever the kids would come home and say, well, so and so's parents let them do that, I say, we're not them. Like, you're right. We are totally different in that
Yeah.
regard, in that respect. We do not eat the things that other people eat. We do not do those things. And now what's really cool is the kids have come back. They say, Mom, Dad, thanks. Like, coming home to eat at your house is the best thing in the world. It's better than five-star restaurants. Coming
Yeah.
home and engaging in the way that we do, watching how the people that we go to school with, the people that we work with, how they're so entitled and, like they get it now, but back then it was really difficult. we as a generation have allowed this to happen, and we need to be the ones to fix it. I don't want to push this onto the millennial generation, the Gen Z,
Yeah.
it's not their fault. We've got to fix it. I believe. Pete, I know we're coming up on our time, but I want to
Yeah.
get, one more question into you, because I believe, and I think we've referenced this a few times, that as we age as parents, we grow, we change, we evolve over time, and hopefully become more evolved men and more evolved women. What is something that you used to believe as a parent that you no
Mhm.
longer do?
Um, I'd have to say it's probably the thing we talked about earlier, which is um, one size fits all for my kids doesn't apply,
Yeah,
right? Uh, I know that I had to adjust my parenting style in a dramatic way that I had not anticipated, and I think, but there's a line there that doesn't need to be crossed, and you just mentioned it. Um, it doesn't mean I became softer. It doesn't mean I didn't hold the line. It doesn't mean I set the right example. It did change the way I communicated. And to your point, we talked about executed. I executed differently.
yeah,
So I think for me that was really important. And I was on a podcast called the Dad Quarterback podcast a while back. We talked about some of the similar things you just mentioned. It's a great podcast. My youngest son tried out for the top soccer team when he was 11 years old, and he didn't make it when the roster came out. He wasn't on it. He looked at me and tears were in his eyes, and that's where a lot of parents go, it's okay, Johnny, we'll go to a different club, we'll get you on a different team,
yeah,
you're the
yeah,
best, you should be
yeah,
there, you got
yeah.
screwed, we got screwed. And I looked at him, I said, how do you feel? He said, I'm disappointed. I said, what are you going to do about it? He said, go practice.
Nice.
I said, that's all you can do, buddy. I said, somewhere, somehow, some kid played a little less video games, touched the soccer ball a little bit more than you did,
Mhm.
and deserves it. You're a good kid. Don't do this for me. I'm very happy with you in any team. I'll be at every one of your games. But I said, if you want this, you've got to earn it.
Yeah,
And that's it. And I think that's, to your point, that's that critical point where parents feel like they have to protect their children. I didn't want to push my kids to play sports. I wanted to drive them in the car to get to the sports they wanted to play, if that makes sense. Like I said, if you keep making the
absolutely.
team, I'll get you there
Hmm.
one way or the other. If you get cut, we'll figure out the next opportunity. But it's I don't know. I think as a parent, I probably spend more time in deeper conversation with my kids than I used to. As I mentioned before, you got to change from the funny guy to the parent,
Yeah,
and that's a blessing.
beautiful perspective. Well, Pete, I know you talk a little bit about parenting, fatherhood in content that you create, but that's not your whole thing. You also
Hmm.
run a podcast that we referenced earlier, the Eating Crow podcast. Tell our listeners a little bit more about what's going on in your life and where they can find the content that you create and where they can find your podcast.
So the podcast is on the usual suspects: Spotify, Apple. It's also on YouTube, and I run a it's a consultant company, but more often than not, what I help companies with is just finding people.
Mm.
Um, I've been recruited a couple times in my life, and when I sold my company in 17, a couple friends of mine were really struggling trying to find good talent, and they struggled with recruiters. Um, Recruiting is like any, there's good recruiters and bad recruiters. There's technology, there's all sorts of things out. But at the end of the day, it's getting to know people and making sure that you put them in a place where they're going to thrive and be happy, and you help the company find people who are going to make them thrive and be happy. So, my company's called Crucible Partners. That's where I spend most of my time. I'm also running a company here in Boca Raton, Florida, which is a very different thing. We can talk about something else. I'm really running two businesses right now, and have never been happier.
Love that. Well, the podcast is Eating Crow, the man, Pete Durand. Thanks for coming on. And if you have not caught our first episode with Pete, I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. We had a great conversation the first time Pete was around. But Pete, thanks again for coming on today.
My pleasure. Really great job with the questions and the theme. You're a pro, bud. Loved it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining me today for this episode of The Evolved Man. If you're learning from and gaining value from this podcast, please subscribe to the Evolved Man newsletter, where I can support you even more in your personal evolution. I want to help you reverse engineer your success. The Evolved Man newsletter is like getting a free coaching session to keep you moving forward on your path of personal success. Go to theevolvedmanpodcast.com to sign up today. If you found value in this episode, you can give us up to a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify and share it with your network. That's the best way to support the podcast so we can continue to get great guests and provide you with the best wisdom for your daily life. Until next time, keep evolving.